Well, good morning, Northview. How y'all doing this morning? It is so good to see you. So good to be joining up with everybody who's watching online. We're glad you could be with us today. This is one of my favorite days of the year. Pie Auction Sunday is always one of my favorites. Can't wait for it. Like Chris said, hope you guys come back or stick around for that at the end of third service. Today is also the deadline for the Uncommon Men's Conference sign-up. Okay, so this is also why this is a favorite day of mine, because it's the day when all the guys who said, yeah, I'm going, but actually haven't registered, it's the day they finally let us know for real, I'm coming. So, hey, if you're thinking about it, don't think anymore, just sign up. If you were planning on it, don't plan anymore, just sign up. If you know somebody on the edge, give them a nudge and say, hey, let's go together, this is going to be fantastic. Numbers are already up beyond what we saw last year. It's going to be awesome. It is going to be awesome. Can't wait for that March 7th and 8th, which is just right around the corner. So deadline today. You can sign up via the QR code on the screen in the weekly, or just to make it as simple as possible, out these doors, straight after service, there is a booth set up, and you can go there and get signed up, and we'll get you taken care of. Can't wait for that. Last year, first time we ever did Uncommon, and didn't know what to expect. A couple hundred guys plus showed up, which was amazing. One of the things as we were planning and prepping, there's always details related to the food part. And one of the things that was amazing for me to watch last year was we opened the doors around 5, guys started coming in, there was a little bit of time to just hang out, play, goof around, and then session started like at 7 or something. I was blown away at how ravenous these men showed up at 5 o'clock, like they had not eaten all week waiting for that. And so every preparation that was in place, have you ever hosted something and then all of a sudden went, oh gosh, do we have enough? Like, everything we put out on the counter as fast as we could put it out was just devoured. And we'd put more out on the counter, devoured. We put more on the counter, devoured. It was hilarious. And then we finally kind of got everybody, they were eating cardboard off of the pizza boxes because they were still just hungry. We had a session, we had a whole nother meal after that, devoured. I mean, just food. So my big concern was like at the end of the night, we got to do breakfast tomorrow. Like, are we ready? Like, how much do we have ordered for tomorrow? Have you ever been there? Have you ever been wondering if you have enough? I remember going through a potluck dinner out in Washington when we were doing a church. And listen, I'm telling you, the Northwest cannot even hold a candle to a potluck in the Midwest. They have no idea how to potluck. I mean, at a Midwest potluck, you're bringing a side and a dessert per individual almost, let alone per family. I mean, there is a feast. And I remember we went through one time at one of these, and I'm telling my kids, because it's like, hey, Pastor, go first. And I'm like, don't take more than one piece. Like, there's no way. I'm telling other staff, get pizza, call right now. This is not going to be enough. That's a panic move, right? When you're trying to feed a whole bunch of people and you're worried about it. How much do we have? Is it going to be enough? That question is a question that's going to show up in the text that we're going to look at today. In fact, it's going to show up in the middle of a story that I think is one of the greatest and largest and most impactful stories in all of the Gospels. I'll tell you why I think that. All 4 Gospel writers tell about it. Now, we've got 4 accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all telling us about the same man, Jesus. But they do tell a little bit from their own experience and from their own vantage point. So not every story in the Gospels is told every time by all 4 writers. But whenever they do line up and tell the same story, it's always significant. Once we get to the final week of Jesus' life, there's a lot of times when they all 4 line up and start talking about the same event. But outside of the final week, this is it, guys. This is the only time where they're all telling the same story. So that means it was a big moment. A big deal. And in the middle of that whole story was a question about food and volume of food. We're going to start in Matthew 14. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn there. We're actually going to jump through all 4 gospel accounts to kind of tell the story through all the vantage points, through all the eyes. But before we do, let me set the backdrop a little bit for the moment. This is a story that's referred to as the feeding of the 5,000. The historians will tell you that number likely was more like 15,000, maybe even more, because the 5,000 number is only counting the men who were there. There were women, there were children. In fact, there's a child that's going to play a prominent part in this story that were left uncounted. Large multitude. Maybe you're wondering, why was there a crowd out in the middle of nowhere of 15,000 plus hanging out with no food? What's going on? Why are they doing that? Well, it's Passover. It's Passover. Passover was it was the Jewish Independence Day. It was a holiday that was celebrated every year. It was a holiday that was commanded in God's law for the Jews to come into Jerusalem to celebrate. And one historian, a guy by the name of Josephus, estimated that every Passover, upwards of 2 million Jews would travel in and be a part of this celebration. So crowds are part of this moment. And so everybody's kind of heading to Jerusalem. They're heading towards that direction. And that's the backdrop and the setting for this moment. Now, Passover was, again, it was kind of an Independence Day type thing. It was celebrating the time when the Israelites were held captive in Egypt. God sent some plagues to get the Pharaoh of Egypt to turn his heart and let the people go. And it took 10 of them to get him there. The 10th one was the plague of the firstborn, where the firstborn child in every household was killed, except those who had taken the blood of a lamb and put it on the doorpost of their house. And on that night, when the death angel came over the region, he would pass over all the houses that had the blood on the doorpost. And so all of the Israelite firstborn children were spared. So that became the impetus for the Pharaoh to finally say, fine, get out of here. I'm going to turn you guys loose. And then off they go, heading towards the promised land. So it was a big moment. It was a big celebration. Crowds and feasts and festival. And it was all about God and his ability to provide. Because not only did he provide a deliverer in Moses, but he also provided for them when they were out in the wilderness for 40 years. He fed them every day with this stuff called manna that would appear on the ground that they could eat. Every day he took care of them. Every day he provided for them. It was a celebration of deliverance, of freedom, but also that God had provided for his people. So I want you to take all that in, and now we'll dive into Matthew 14. It says, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and they said, this is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. And Jesus replied, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Then in Mark chapter 6, verse 38, we see this response. Jesus asked them, how many loaves do you have? This is the question that I want to hang on today. How many loaves do you have? John chapter 6, verse 6 records this, happened next, that he asked this only to test them, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. In other words, this is a pop quiz. I hated pop quizzes in school. I didn't like being put on the spot. I always felt like it was a spotlight on my lack of preparation and also my lack of comprehension, and also on my lack of an ability to do what I was probably expected to be able to do. It was like you weren't able to deliver in the moment with the right answer. I always felt like pop quizzes were like playing whack-a-mole. You do your best to say the right answer. Nope, wrong. Didn't study, didn't come prepared. This is in this whole series where we're looking at questions. And if you're new or haven't been in here in a while, this series, Learning Curve, what we've been doing is we've been going through the Gospels, kind of the arc of Jesus' ministry, not story for story, but question for question, seeing that in many ways, each question Jesus asked contained a wealth of reflectability and an opportunity for us to be able to grow and take next faith steps. So all the questions provide a test of sorts. This question is actually called a test. This one is actually explicitly said. He asked this only to test them, to see if they had the right answer, because something's going to happen in the next few minutes that's going to help them see what they should have said. John chapter 6, Verse 8, another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? And then in Luke chapter 9, verse 16, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, Jesus gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. And they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. I love this story. Probably one of the most memorable in all the Gospels. How 5,000 or 15,000 or however many it actually was fed through the lunch of a little boy, 5 loaves and 2 fish. But in the middle of the whole story, the turning point, the test in the whole thing, is a question that Jesus asks, how many loaves do you have? What I want to do for the next however many minutes we have together is unpack what was underneath that question. I think the first thing that Jesus was driving at was a desire to see what perspective that the hearers or the people in the moment lived life through. Specifically, maybe thinking of it like a mindset. And he wanted to identify, what mindset do you live from? A scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset? Do you live life from an abundance mindset where there's always more and there's always possibilities and there's always something that could be done? Or do you live more from scarcity and there's limited resources and everything has a stat and everything has a probability and everything has a likelihood? I think it's natural and it's easy to live in a scarcity mindset. I think it's probably the default mode that most of us live in. Some of you don't even like this conversation because you wouldn't like the term scarcity mindset. You'd rather say, I'm a realist, bro. Like, I deal in math, I deal in stats, I deal in observations and statistics and things that we can measure. So I'm not being labeled scarce. I'm just being honest. I'm being real. I'm dealing with reality. And there's some truth to that. There are certain things that we're up against in life and certain things that seem like there's a limited amount of, whether it's time or resources. I tell you what, in Jesus' day, there was a big deal and there was a perception that this was limited: honor. In the culture that Jesus lived in, there was a perception and a way of life that's called a shame. It was called a shame-honor society. And the idea is that there's only so much honor that can go around. Like in our entire community, there's only X amount of honor. And so if anybody gets honored, that honor that exists in the community has to be taken from somebody else to be given to the person of honor. So every time somebody was praised, somebody was recognized, somebody was given a position or a title, or in any way publicly was appreciated, the way that society functioned is it was appreciated at the expense of something or someone else. If I praise you, it means I'm lowering me. I'm giving you some of my honor to do that. Now, that's not necessarily the right way to do life, right? I think some people still live in that reality. You'll watch people that are maybe teammates, and they believe that if I say good job to you, that means I must be bad. Great teammates realize that's not the case. I can praise you, and I can say you did a great job without having that affect me at all, because there's an unlimited amount of encouragement and an unlimited amount of praise that could go out. But there was a shame-honor society that was very, very real, and it was even very, very felt in this moment by the disciples, who were basically telling Jesus, don't even attempt to step into this moment because the facts say that there's no way we can feed this entire multitude. And if we step into this moment and we try to feed this group and we fall flat on our face, it'll look bad and we'll be shamed. So don't even try. Just send them home, get them out of here, and let's go on. They don't have an expectation that you would do anything in this moment. And Jesus, here he is living in an abundance mindset. The great provider. The one who the whole world is being held together in his hands. The one who's already demonstrated miracle after miracle. The one who has the ability to transform the moment. In fact, who can regularly transform moments. And he's done it time and time again. He'll do it again in this story where he'll do the impossible through very unremarkable means. We love sometimes to focus on what we do or don't, or what we don't have. The Philip says to Jesus, 6 months' wages wouldn't buy enough for everybody to eat one bite. Andrew says, well, here's one little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but I mean, how far could that go among such a crowd? But the question was really designed to get underneath the idea of a mindset. What mindset do you live under? An abundance mindset? That God is your great provider? And here Jesus is even as the great provision. Standing in a situation where on Passover being all about God's ability to provide, how he could not only just provide rescue, but he could also provide sustenance and fulfillment on an ongoing basis. Here he is in the middle of a meal-based miracle. Not manna in the desert this time, but now 5 loaves and 2 fish. He's standing in the middle of this moment saying, what do you view this reality to be? One that's impossible? One that's implausible? Or one that has all kinds of hope because I'm here and I am in it? That's what Jesus is doing when he's asking that question. As he's creating out of nothing more food, more food, more food, more food. He's asking the question, how many loaves? Because he's trying to ask this question, do you realize that I am your perfect provider? Did you consider that if you asked me to step into this situation, something could be different? Do you realize that I am your perfect provider? And if you do realize that I'm your perfect provider, shouldn't it be reflected in the way you think, act, and feel in situations like this? That's one of the big takeaways for us as we look at this story that happened a long time ago. It's a moment in history where God demonstrated, I am here to take care of you. I will provide for you. You can trust me to provide for you. And if that's the case, it has implications, right? If God is the great provider, it has implications for your life and my life. Like if God will provide, I shouldn't worry. If I know that God is the great provider, I shouldn't worry. I shouldn't be wrapped up in worry and consumed with worry all the time, because I am provided for by a God who could feed 5,000 with the lunch of a little boy. I shouldn't worry. I do worry, but I shouldn't worry. I shouldn't worry, because if I give God an opportunity to meet me here in this moment, I trust that he has the ability to take me from a position of doubt to a position where I am actually carrying the burden of blessing. That's what happened to the disciples. In this story, they start out doubting that there's anything that can be done. There's nothing that could work to satisfy or fix this situation. They finish by bearing the weight and the burden of a basket of leftovers. How many leftovers? Did you catch that in the story? 12. How many disciples are there? 12. Do you think that was accidental? No. Jesus not only had enough to feed this entire multitude, he made sure there was exactly enough so that each one of his 12 disciples would have to carry the load of a blessing off the property. He didn't just provide, he abundantly provided. He moved them from doubt to bearing the burden of blessing. I've seen people, one of the most enjoyable things I think I watch as in ministry as a pastor is this exact thing happen, where people go through a journey where, whether it's relationships or a job or a health crisis or whatever it might be, financial crisis, there's something that's out in front of them where they feel like, I don't see any way through. And they're full of doubt. And they cry out to God. And God meets them where they are. And in time, they look back on that moment and go, I am now carrying the burden of the blessing that God gave me. There was once a season in my life where I didn't see how God was going to do it, and now I'm carrying the blessing. God is still in the business of transforming and shaping and renewing and changing things in our realities. We'll talk more in depth about worry in a couple weeks, but it doesn't take very many days for us to get caught up in worry. I jokingly say that I could plan a worry sermon every year, twice a year, and y'all would never feel like it was out of place. You would every time I preach a sermon on worry, I'll get 10 people in the lobby to go, how did you know exactly what to preach on? Well, the only thing I can say is because you're a human being. And I know that we are consumed with worry, but God loves to show up and do things that don't make any sense, where he reveals that this isn't a scarcity mindset that we live in, that with him, it's an abundance. Just a few weeks ago, we had a student event that happened here in this room, and it was just bigger than anything we've ever done. 240 plus students came and were a part of this on President's Day weekend. It was just incredible. And Parker had been prepping, and one of the things he told me was a story afterwards of a response moment where part of the response was they came forward and picked up one of these, this journal, like a prayer journal, Bible journal that they could take with them. And he tried to imagine what an amazing turnout would be at this event. And so he bought 200 of these and had them all up here lined up on the stage. Well, there's 240 students that showed up. And he said, to my eyes, every student in the room came forward to grab one. And so he's immediately panicking because he knows the math ain't mathing. Like, it's not working. And so he's trying to figure out, what is he going to do? I can't do anything in that moment. I'm going to have to come up with a plan B. And as he starts getting down to the last few journals, he can see exactly how many there are, 6. And his eyes then go to the line as it's finishing up to grab these journals. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Somehow, exactly enough. And all that worry in that moment gets replaced with, now I'm carrying the burden of blessing, knowing God just showed up in a powerful way to remind me nothing is outside of my view. I don't need to worry because God will provide. Secondly, because God will provide, I should be generous. Because God will provide, I don't have to think of my resources as being scarce or limited or finite. I'm being invited into a journey, in a relationship with a God who created anything or everything out of nothing. So if he's in my camp, if he's in my life, I'm never going to lack anything. I'm so grateful of John's little detail of the little boy with the lunch. Because he's the one guy that's prepared in the moment. Like somewhere, his mom is smiling. Because it finally was that day that she had been prepping for all these years. Like, you better take a lunch with you because the day might get long and you won't have anything to eat. There was probably a little pair of change of underwear and maybe some mittens, in that bag that she sent him with as well. But this was the moment. This was the moment. But understand, this kid was the only one who was actually good and didn't need anything because he was taken care of. He had it. But rather than go, hey, sucks to be you, wish you had a mom like mine, he doesn't. He's basically like, this is all I got, but if Jesus is calling for it, he can have it. He can have it. And he trusted in that moment that there was something that could be better than just keeping it to himself. That takes an understanding of where what you have comes from. That takes an understanding of who Jesus is, and understanding that he is the great provider. And when you realize that he's the great provider, you can be generous because you understand, I don't live in scarcity. I live in abundance. And God could do more with my 5 loaves and 2 fish than I could ever do by just keeping it to myself. That's why Paul would encourage in 2 Corinthians 9 He says each of you should give what you have decided to give in your heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion. For God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. This is an invitation for us not to be cautious, but to be generous. That if we serve a God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, if we serve a God who could speak the whole world into existence, if we serve a God who could create out of nothing, that he could surround you with blessing so that you'll never be lacking, you'll never have what you don't need. We are so convinced when it comes to resources that if we keep, that we are being wise. And God is inviting us to live in a different reality, knowing that the blessing is far greater if we learn to be generous, because everything we have has come from him. Because God provides, it changes the way we live. It changes the way we move about in this life. And I guess that's where I want to land for this last one. Because God will provide, I should stay faithful. I got nothing to worry about. I got nothing to lose. I got everything to gain if I continue to stay faithful. Sometimes that's hard to do when situations look a little bleak or when resources look a little thin. Sometimes it's even because we think our contribution is just never going to matter. The absurdity of the 5 loaves and 2 fish is impossible to miss. But it was the catalyst. It was the catalyst for the miracle. It reminds me of a quote from Francis Schaeffer from years ago where he said, "We must remember throughout our Christian lives that in God's sight there are no little people and no little places. Only one thing is important, to be consecrated persons in God's place at each moment. Those who think of themselves as little people in little places, if committed to Christ and living under his lordship in the whole of life, may by God's grace change the flow of a generation." Man, that stirs my heart on a couple fronts. One, because it reminds me that wherever you are, wherever you're planted, whatever you're doing, whether it's your work, your house, the people that are in relationships every day with, your family, like you are there because God's put you there. And don't be tempted to think that that is a little assignment or that that is an insignificant moment. Because these are moments and places and people that God has called you to serve, to stay faithful to him as you are in relationship with them through. It also reminds me of just the significance of even a day like today in just a little bit. Some of you are going to look at pie and you're going to wonder, how in the world does this pie connect to eternity? But I'm going to tell you, it does. You're going to see pies go for numbers that make no earthly sense. And some of you are going to be convinced to say, I would never spend that much for a pie. I'll just go to Kroger and buy 10 pies for less than that. And I can take them all home and eat with me. But you understand it was never about the pie? It was also never about 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's not about the pie. If I changed the conversation and said, if you don't think about it as pie, but you thought of, I could buy an opportunity for one more kid in the most open window of their whole human trajectory and their most receptive moment towards God, I could buy one more opportunity for somebody to hear that God is the great provider, that he sent his only son, Jesus, to die on a cross. Oh my gosh, what number wouldn't we give? What value would we put on just one more? That's what Jesus was doing in this moment. Was he was inviting people to ask, who do you see me to be? Do you understand that I am the source of all of your fulfillment, of all of your blessing, of everything that you want. Don't forget, he asked this question to test. He knew what he was going to do. He was going to do this miracle. He wanted to see, are you anticipating it? Are you ready for it? Would you even ask me for it? These guys had already seen him do water into wine. And yet they were quick to dismiss and say, nope, this is impossible. Send everybody home. Jesus is the great provider. Not only of a meal, but of the most ultimate realities. 1 year from this moment, exactly 1 year from this moment, he will be hanging on a cross, offering his life as a substitute for yours and mine. This time, instead of looking backwards and talking about how once upon a time there was blood on a doorpost that spared some people from sin and death, now it's his blood on a cross that's offered so that you and I would be spared for sin and death. You see, when we talk about our ultimate needs and our ultimate realities, that's it. And what Jesus came to establish and provide for us was not just satisfaction in this life and in this world, but into eternity forever. He is a God who provides. He is the God who satisfies. He is the God who's laid down his life, who offers his life in place of yours and extends a free gift for you to receive, to take him in and to live in his abundance. Jesus was once talking about his purpose in coming. This is from John chapter 10. And he said it probably as well as anyone could ever say it. He said, I've come that people would have life to the full. That's why I'm here. Life to the full. Life abundantly. All you can eat with 12 basketfuls left over. Not room for anything else. Carrying the burden of all the blessing that I am in your life. That's what God wants to offer and invite you into. And I want to invite you to take a step into today. If you've never responded and given your life to Jesus, if you've never accepted him as the great provider for all things in your life, as we sing these next songs, I'll be standing in the back. I'd love to help you take that step. For every one of us, though, let's use this moment to give thanks to a God who sees us right now in this moment, knows our deepest needs and desires, and is ready to fulfill them in ways beyond our imagination. Let's give thanks. Let's stand.